The city below was a sprawling carpet of light, twinkling and shifting as far as the eye could see. From the very top floor of the glass and steel tower, it looked like a silent, beautiful dream, but inside the apartment it was so quiet you could almost hear the silence itself. This was the home of a man who had everything, and because of that, it often felt like he had nothing at all. Ilara moved through the vast, open space like a ghost. Her soft cloth wiped away invisible dust from surfaces that were already shining. The floor was a cool gray marble, and her quiet footsteps made no sound. She was the maid, and her job was to be thorough, efficient, and most importantly, invisible. She preferred it that way. Being unseen was a kind of safety. The man who owned this palace in the sky was named Julian. He was a tycoon, a king in the world of technology. His name was in newspapers and on business screens. People talked about his brilliant mind and his cold heart. He was like a machine that made money. To Ilara, he was just a presence, a storm cloud that moved through the rooms, leaving a chill behind. He was usually gone before she arrived, or he would be locked in his home office, his deep voice murmuring on endless video calls. She would only see traces of him. A half-empty coffee cup left on a table, a suit jacket draped over a chair. Today, however, was different. He was home, and he had been home all day. He was standing by the massive window, his back to the room, watching the day slowly turn into evening. He hadn't moved for a very long time. Ilara tried to be even quieter than usual, her body tense. She cleaned around him, giving him a wide space, hoping to finish her work and slip away without him ever noticing she was there. The air in the room felt heavy, like just before a thunderstorm. A real storm was brewing outside, too. Dark clouds were gathering, and the first fat drops of rain began to hit the window pane. The sound was loud in the silence. Ilara moved towards a large abstract sculpture that stood on a pedestal near the window. It was a twisted piece of dark metal, cold and unfeeling, just like the rest of the decor. It was the last thing to dust before she could leave. She reached out with her cloth, her arm extending towards the sharp edges of the metal. That's when it happened. A hand closed around her wrist. It wasn't rough, but the grip was firm. Her heart, which had been beating steadily, suddenly leaped into her throat. She froze completely, her breath catching in her chest. It was him. He had moved so silently. She could feel the warmth of his skin against hers. She could see the fine fabric of his white shirt sleeve. Her mind raced. What had she done wrong? Had she broken something? Was he angry? Fear, cold and sharp, trickled down her spine. This job was her anchor. She needed it to stay hidden, to survive. Losing it would be a disaster. "Don't move," he murmured. His voice was low, but it wasn't the cold, commanding tone she was used to hearing through his office door. This voice was different. It was raw, stripped bare. It sounded tired, and there was a strange, desperate edge to it that she had never heard before. He didn't pull her towards him. He didn't even turn to look at her. He just held her wrist, his own head bowed slightly. Ilara stayed perfectly still, just as he had asked. She was like a statue, her eyes wide, fixed on his back. The only sound was the rain now lashing against the window. Then he spoke again, and the words were so shocking they didn't make sense at first. "I need to make love," he whispered, his voice cracking on the last word. A fresh wave of panic washed over Ilara. This was it. This was the moment every woman in her position feared. The unwanted advance from a powerful man. Her free hand clenched into a fist at her side. She prepared to pull away, to run, to scream if she had to. But he continued, his words tumbling out in a rushed, broken whisper. "Please, don't move." And in that moment, she understood. He wasn't talking to her, not really. He wasn't seeing her as a woman or even as a person. He was a man drowning, and her presence, her stillness, was the only solid thing he could find to hold on to. He finally turned his head just a little, his profile outlined against the stormy sky. His face, usually so hard and composed, was etched with a pain that was deep and real. "You must think I'm mad," he said, a bitter, sad laugh escaping his lips. A man who has everything, standing in a room full of nothing. He loosened his grip on her wrist, but she didn't pull away. Her fear was slowly being replaced by a confusing, dangerous feeling. Pity. "Everyone wants something from me," he continued, his gaze drifting back to the city. "My money, my influence, my signature on a contract. They smile, they shake my hand, and they plot how to take a piece of me. My ex-wife. She took the biggest piece of all. She took the idea that I could ever be loved for who I am, and not for what I have. He was silent for a long moment, just breathing. Ilara remained still, listening. Her own problems, her own reasons for hiding seemed to shrink in the face of his naked confession. This apartment, he gestured vaguely around the magnificent room. It's a golden cage. I come back here every night to this silence. It's so loud. It screams at me. Tonight, I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear the thought of another minute in this crushing quiet. He looked down at his hand, still lightly holding her wrist as if surprised to find it there. And then I saw you. You were just moving through the room, quiet, calm. You weren't asking for anything. You weren't judging. You were just here. And for a second, the silence didn't feel so loud. He took a deep, shaky breath. I need to make love, not in the way you think. I need to feel a connection, a real human connection, just for a moment. I need to know that I'm not just a wallet, not just a name on a building. I need to know that I exist. His eyes, full of a storm more turbulent than the one outside, finally met hers. So please, don't move, just be here with me. Let me pretend for just 1 minute that I am not alone. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. She wasn't scared anymore. She was heartbroken. This powerful, untouchable man was just a lonely, broken soul. He wasn't asking for her body. He was asking for her humanity. He was asking her to witness his pain, so she made a choice. She relaxed her hand. She let her wrist rest gently in his. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, solid and present, offering him the silent gift of her stillness. She became an anchor in his stormy sea. They stood like that for what felt like an eternity, the tycoon and the maid, connected by a single, simple touch. The rain painted furious patterns on the glass, and the city lights blurred into a beautiful, distant galaxy. In that quiet, spacious room, two invisible people, both hiding from their own worlds, found a strange, profound peace in simply not being alone. The world outside kept turning, but in that moment, inside that room, time itself seemed to stand still for them. The spell was broken by a sudden, bright flash of lightning. It lit up the whole sky, followed a few seconds later by a deep, rolling boom of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The man, Julian, flinched. It was a small, quick movement, but she felt it through his hand. It was as if the lightning had struck him, waking him up from a strange dream. He let go of her wrist as if her skin had suddenly become burning hot. He turned away from her completely, running a hand through his hair. His shoulders, which had been slumped with sadness, were now stiff with what looked like shame. The raw, open man from a moment ago was gone, and the cold, untouchable tycoon was quickly building his walls back up. Ilara's arm fell back to her side. Her wrist felt cold where his hand had been. She didn't know what to do. Should she say something? Should she just leave? Her mind was a jumble of confusion. She had just shared the most intimate, non-intimate moment of her life with her boss. And now she was standing there holding a dusting cloth. He cleared his throat, his voice returning to its usual, more controlled tone, though it was still a little rough around the edges. You should go now. Your work is done for the day. It was a dismissal. A clear one. But it wasn't rude. It was strained, like he was desperately trying to get things back to normal. Ilara just nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Words felt impossible. What could she possibly say? It's okay. It wasn't. I understand. She didn't, not really. So she chose silence. She picked up her cleaning caddy and walked softly toward the door, her legs feeling a little weak. Just as her hand touched the cool metal of the doorknob, he spoke again, his voice low. Thank you. The two words were so quiet she almost didn't hear them over the sound of the rain, but she did. They were filled with a gratitude that was so deep it was painful to hear. She didn't turn around. She just gave a small, slight nod that he probably didn't see, and then she slipped out of the apartment, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The hallway outside was warm and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the stormy, emotional world she had just left. She leaned against the wall for a moment, letting out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her heart was still beating too fast. The elevator ride down to the staff entrance felt like it took a lifetime. She replayed the scene in her head over and over. The grip on her wrist, his broken voice, The confession of a loneliness so deep it was a living thing. She had seen a crack in his perfect, powerful world. And through that crack she had seen a real hurting person. That night, in her own small, simple apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She looked around at her own four walls. They were plain, but they were hers. They were safe. She understood loneliness too. She understood the need to hide. Her reasons were different, born from a fear that was about survival, not money. But the feeling of being alone in a crowded world? That she knew very well. The next morning, the sun was shining as if the storm had never happened. The city streets were clean and fresh. But as Ilara walked into the towering skyscraper, she felt a new kind of nervousness. How would he act? Would he be cold and formal? Would he pretend it never happened? Worse, would he be embarrassed and fire her? She rode the service elevator up, her stomach in knots. When she entered the penthouse, it was empty. Relief washed over her, followed by a strange little pang of disappointment. She was alone again with the marble and the glass. She started her work, but everything felt different. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was filled with the echo of his words. When she dusted the sculpture by the window, she paused, her fingers gently tracing the cold metal where his hand had been when he stopped her. Later that morning, she heard the door to his private office open. Her body went stiff. He walked out dressed in another perfect, expensive suit. He was on the phone, talking in that sharp, business-like voice she was used to. The merger numbers are non-negotiable.
I don't care what they said.
Make it happen. He walked right past her towards the kitchen. He didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge her at all. It was exactly as she had feared. He was pretending nothing had happened. But then something small occurred. As he passed by the dining table where she had just finished polishing the wood, he stopped his phone conversation for a half-second. I don't care what they... He paused. His eyes, for just a flicker of a moment, met hers. It wasn't a long look. It was quick, almost shy. Then he looked away and continued into the kitchen. What told you? The numbers are final. That tiny glance, that brief moment of eye contact felt more significant than a long conversation. He had seen her. Not the invisible maid, but her. Ilara. Later, when she was cleaning the main bathroom, she found something. On the counter, next to the sink, was a single, small, expensive chocolate, still in its fancy foil wrapper. It was placed right in the center, as if left there for someone to find. It was such a small, silly thing, but it felt like a message. A silent thank you that didn't need words. She picked it up and held it in her palm. A small smile touched her lips. She put the chocolate in her pocket. The days that followed were a strange new dance. He never spoke to her directly about that night. But the invisible wall between them had become a glass wall. They could see each other through it now. He started leaving little traces. A book he had been reading was left on a coffee table, open to a page with a poem. It felt like an invitation to see a part of his mind. He stopped leaving his coffee cup on the table for her to clean. He would sometimes carry it to the kitchen himself. It was a small gesture of respect, and he looked at her. Not in a creepy or uncomfortable way, but he noticed her. He would see her watering the plants on the balcony, and would watch for a moment before turning away. He saw the way she arranged the flowers in a vase, adding her own little touch of beauty to his cold home. One afternoon, she was humming a very old sad song from her childhood while she folded the laundry. It was a habit she had when she felt relaxed, a piece of her past that she carried with her. She didn't realize he had come out of his office and was standing in the hallway listening. When she saw him, she stopped immediately, her face turning red. He didn't say anything. He just stood there for a moment, and then he gave her a look that wasn't a smile, but it was warm. It was a look of understanding. Then he went back into his office and closed the door. Ilara realized that the man she had been so afraid of was just as afraid himself. Afraid of being lonely, afraid of being used, and now maybe he was a little afraid of this new, quiet connection that was growing between them. It was fragile, like a tiny seedling pushing its way up through concrete. It had no right to be there. But it was growing anyway, reaching for the sun. The quiet dance between them continued for another week. The little chocolate stopped, but other things began. He started leaving a second clean coffee mug on the counter next to the expensive machine, as if suggesting she could have one too. She never did, but the offer felt kind. One day, a beautiful, thick, soft blanket appeared folded on the sofa she usually dusted around. It was a splash of warm color in the cool gray room. She wondered if it was for her. For the moments she would take her short break, but she never dared to use it. The biggest change was in the silence. It wasn't heavy or lonely anymore. It had become a comfortable shared quiet. They could be in the same large room, him reading a financial report on the sofa, her polishing the windows, and it didn't feel strange or tense. It felt peaceful. This new normal was so delicate, so surprising, that Alara started to let her guard down. She began to feel safe, not just in her job, but in his presence. This was a mistake. When you feel safe, you get careless. You forget the rules you set for yourself to survive. One Thursday afternoon, she was cleaning his home office. This was a task she always did with extra care and speed. It was the heart of his empire, filled with papers that probably held million-dollar secrets. She never looked at them. Her eyes were always down, focused on the surfaces, the trash bin, the vacuum cleaner's path. He was not in the room. He was on a long phone call in the living room, his voice a low, steady murmur. She was almost finished, quickly wiping the dust from a high shelf behind his large wooden desk. As she pulled her hand back, her sleeve caught on the edge of a simple framed photograph that was turned slightly away from the room, facing his chair. The frame wobbled, tipped, and fell. It happened in a slow-motion horror. The frame hit the edge of the desk with a sickening crack, the glass shattering. Before it clattered to the floor, the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. The murmur from the living room stopped instantly. Ilara's blood ran cold. She stood frozen, staring at the broken glass scattered across the expensive rug. It wasn't just the frame. It was the photograph inside. It was a picture of him, much younger, with an older woman who had his eyes, his mother, she guessed. He was smiling in a way she had never seen, a real, unguarded, happy smile. Her mind screamed. This was it. This was the end. She had broken a personal item, a treasured memory. She had been too comfortable, too clumsy. The fear came rushing back, 10 times stronger than before. He would be furious. The fragile trust they had built would shatter just like the glass. She heard his footsteps approaching. Quick, firm. She dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she started to gather the sharp pieces. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. She whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling. He appeared in the doorway. She couldn't look up at him. She just kept frantically picking up shards, her head bowed low in shame and fear. Stop. His voice was not loud, but it was firm. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed. She stopped, her hands hovering over the broken glass. She finally dared to look up. He was standing over her, his face unreadable. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the broken picture. It was an accident, she stammered, her voice small. My sleeve caught it. I will pay for it. I will replace the glass in the frame. I am so very sorry. He slowly knelt down on the rug opposite her, right there in the middle of the broken pieces. He didn't seem to care about his expensive trousers. He reached out and carefully picked up the photograph from the wreckage. He brushed a tiny piece of glass from his younger face. For a long moment, he just looked at it. The silence was awful. Ilara braced herself for the anger. It's just a frame, he said quietly, still looking at the photo. It's just glass. Then he did something she never expected. He looked directly at her, his gaze steady. Are you hurt? The question was so simple, so kind, it completely disarmed her. She had been expecting fury, and instead, he was asking if she was okay. She looked down at her hands, realizing only then that a small sliver of glass had nicked her thumb. A tiny bead of blood was welling up. She shook her head. It's nothing, he saw the blood. He stood up, walked over to his desk, and pulled a clean white handkerchief from a drawer. He came back, knelt again, and handed it to her. It was a small, simple act, but it felt incredibly intimate. It was his handkerchief monogrammed with his initials. Here, he said. She took it, her fingers brushing against his. Thank you, she whispered, pressing the soft cloth to her thumb. He turned his attention back to the mess. Instead of ringing for another staff member, he started helping her. He carefully picked up the larger pieces of glass and laid them on a file folder. They worked in silence, side by side on the floor, cleaning up the mess she had made. As they worked, he spoke, his voice low. That was taken a long time ago. On my graduation day, my mother, she was so proud. He paused, holding a piece of the broken frame. She was the last person who looked at me and just saw her son. Not the company, not the bank account, just me. Ilara listened, her heart aching for him. She understood that loss perfectly. "She would have liked you," he said almost to himself. The statement was so unexpected it took her breath away. She didn't know what to say. When the last piece of glass was gone and the photograph was safely set on his desk, he stood and offered her a hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. His hand was warm and strong. He pulled her gently to her feet. Their eyes met and they were standing very close. The air in the room felt charged again, but it was different from the night of the storm. That was a desperate energy. This was something else. This was a connection, solid and real, built not on a desperate plea but on a shared moment of clumsiness, kindness, and a broken picture. He didn't let go of her hand right away. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face as if seeing her for the very first time, truly seeing her. "You have the kindest eyes," he said softly. It wasn't a line. It was an observation, spoken with a sense of wonder. In that moment, the last of her professional walls crumbled. She wasn't just a maid cleaning a tycoon's house. He wasn't just a powerful man tolerating a servant. They were just two people, surrounded by the ghosts of their pasts, finding a little bit of comfort in the present. The shocking thing wasn't a loud event or a dramatic reveal. The shocking thing was how simple and quiet it felt to finally, truly connect with another human being. The world outside, with all its rules and dangers, faded away, and for that one long moment, there was only the two of them in the quiet room. The moment in the office stretched out, fragile and beautiful like a soap bubble. He held her hand and she let him. His thumb moved just once, a soft stroke across her knuckles. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not really. It was a gesture of thanks, of recognition. It said, "I see you and I am grateful you are here." Then, the bubble popped. A sharp electronic buzz cut through the silence. It was the intercom from the building's front desk. The sound was so sudden and harsh that they both jumped. He dropped her hand immediately, the spell broken. He cleared his throat, his professional mask sliding back into place so fast it was like it had never left. He walked to his desk and pressed a button. "Yes?" "Mr. Vance, your car is here for the meeting at the Grand," a voice said through the speaker. "Thank you. I'll be right down." He didn't look at her again. He picked up his briefcase and his phone, his movements brisk and efficient. "Please, just finish up in here," he said, his voice back to its normal, distant tone, and then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Elara was left alone in the office, her hand still tingling where he had touched it. She looked down at the white handkerchief, now spotted with her small drop of blood. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. She knew she should throw it away, but she couldn't. The rest of the day felt empty. The huge apartment seemed too quiet again. The comfortable silence they had shared now felt like a memory. She finished her work quickly and left, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. That night in her small apartment, she took out the handkerchief. She washed the blood spot out carefully, ironed it smooth, and folded it into a perfect square. She put it in a small wooden box where she kept her few treasures. It was a stupid thing to do, she knew, but it felt like proof. Proof that the moment had been real. The next day, he was away on a business trip. The apartment was empty for 2 whole days. She cleaned every room thoroughly, but her eyes kept drifting to the spot on the office rug where they had knelt together. She found herself missing the sound of his footsteps, the low murmur of his voice. She was worried that when he returned, things would be back to the way they were before the storm, that the connection they had forged would be forgotten. On the day he was due back, she felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. She decided to do something a little different. On her way to work, she stopped at a small flower shop and bought a single, sunny yellow orchid. It wasn't expensive or flashy, but it was alive. It was warm. She placed it in a simple glass vase on the kitchen counter, right where he would see it when he went to make his coffee. She didn't leave a note. It was just a small piece of warmth, a silent welcome back. She was vacuuming the living room when she heard the key in the door. Her heart jumped. She turned off the vacuum and stood still, waiting. He walked in, looking tired from his trip. He dropped his suitcase by the door and loosened his tie. His eyes scanned the room, and for a second they rested on her. He gave her a small, tired nod. Then he walked into the kitchen. She held her breath, listening. She heard him stop. There was a long silence. Then she heard the soft sound of the coffee machine being started. A few minutes later, he walked back into the living room holding his coffee mug. He walked over to the window and stood there just like he had on that first day, but everything was different now. "Thank you for the flower," he said, his back still to her. "It's nice. It adds color." "You're welcome," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned around to face her. He looked less tired now, more thoughtful. The meeting was long and loud. People talking, always talking, but never really saying anything. He took a sip of his coffee. It's good to be back to the quiet. He wasn't just talking about the apartment. He was talking about her, about the peace they had found together. He gestured to the sofa. Would you like to sit down for a moment?" It was the most shocking thing he had ever asked her. It crossed a line that had never been crossed. To sit as an equal in his living room. She hesitated, her cleaning instincts telling her it was wrong. "Please," he said. "Just for a minute." Slowly, she walked over and sat on the very edge of the sofa, her back straight. He sat in a large armchair opposite her, not too close. They sat in their now familiar, comfortable silence for a little while. The city hummed outside the window. "I've been thinking," he began, looking into his coffee mug. "I know a little about you. I know you are quiet. I know you are careful. I know you are kind," he paused, "but I don't know anything else. I don't know where you come from. I don't know what you dream about when you're not here." Ilara's blood ran cold. This was the question she had been dreading. This was the door she could never ever open. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. How could she answer? She couldn't tell him the truth. The truth was a locked box buried deep inside her, and the key was thrown away. She chose her words with the care of someone walking on a floor made of eggshells. "My past is not a happy story," she said, her voice low and careful. "It is a story I had to leave behind. This life here, this job, it is my fresh start. It is my quiet place. It is all I have." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading with him to understand, to not push further. "The person I was before, she is gone. I am just me now, the woman who cleans your home." He watched her, his eyes soft. He could see the real fear in her face. He could see the walls she had built, not out of coldness but out of necessity. He saw the pain and he respected it. "I understand," he said gently. "We all have our shadows." He didn't ask again. Instead, he offered a piece of his own. "My shadow is a deep loneliness, a fear that I will spend my whole life in this beautiful empty box, and no one will ever really know I was here." His confession hung in the air between them, a gift of trust in return for her small piece of truth. "I think," she said softly, surprising herself by speaking, "that someone knows you are here now." A real, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger, lighter. "Yes," he said, his eyes holding hers. "I think so too." He didn't try to find out her secrets. He didn't demand to know her past. In that moment, he accepted her completely for who she was now. The woman with the kind eyes who had walked into his lonely world and offered him a moment of peace. And in doing so, he gave her the greatest gift she could have asked for, a safe place to be without having to explain why she needed it. The mystery of her past remained, but it no longer felt like a wall between them. It just felt like a part of her, and he was okay with that. The understanding they reached that afternoon changed everything. The glass wall between them was gone. Now they shared the same space, two planets that had slowly drifted into the same warm orbit. He started having his morning coffee after she arrived. He would sit at the kitchen island with his tablet reading the news, and she would move around him, cleaning. Sometimes they would talk. Small, safe things. He discovered she loved the old gnarled oak tree in the park below, and he found himself looking at it more often, seeing its beauty through her eyes. She learned he hated the cold modern art in his own apartment, that it had been chosen by a designer to project an image, not to bring joy. One Saturday he was in the living room, staring at a complicated-looking financial chart on his large computer screen. He looked frustrated, running his hands through his hair. She was dusting nearby. She glanced at the screen. The chart was a mess of colored lines and numbers, but to her it wasn't just a confusing picture. Without even thinking, she spoke softly. "The problem might be in the secondary variance. The primary trend is strong, but the secondary line is pulling it down. It creates a false signal." She froze the moment the words were out of her mouth. Her heart stopped. She had done the one thing she promised herself she would never do. She had let a piece of her old self, her educated, analytical self, slip out. He turned slowly in his chair, his eyes wide with pure shock. He wasn't just surprised. He was stunned. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low and careful. She looked down at her dusting cloth, her face burning with panic. It was nothing. I was just talking to myself. "I'm sorry." "No," he said, standing up. He walked over to her, his expression not angry but intensely curious. "That was not nothing. Those were not the words of someone who just cleans. You understood that chart. You understood it instantly." She shook her head, backing away a step. "Please, I didn't mean to." He could see the sheer terror in her eyes. It was the same look she had when she broke the picture frame, but multiplied by 1,000. This was a deep, fundamental fear. He realized in that moment that her secret wasn't a simple, sad story. It was something bigger, something dangerous. He held up his hands, a gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to be afraid. Not of me, I would never do anything to hurt you." He meant it. Every word. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. The panic in her chest began to slow from a gallop to a steady, frightened thump. He pointed to the screen. "Just tell me how you knew that. Please. I need to know who you are." She looked at him, this man who had shared his deepest loneliness with her, this man who had accepted her silence without pushing. He had earned a piece of the truth. She took a deep, shaky breath. "In my previous life," she began, choosing each word as if it were made of fire, "I worked with numbers. I analyzed data. I was a doctor, but not for people, for businesses. I helped them understand what was sick and what was healthy." He stared at her, his mind trying to put the pieces together. A brilliant financial mind was hiding as a maid. It made no sense. "You were an analyst? A consultant?" She gave a small, sad nod. "Something like that. A very good one. Then why?" He gestured around the room at her cleaning caddy, her simple clothes. "Why are you here?" A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. I found a sickness. A very bad one. I tried to report it, to stop it. The people involved, they are not good people. They are powerful and dangerous. To make me quiet, they set me up. They made it look like I was the one who had done something wrong." She wrapped her arms around herself as if she were cold. "I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my friends. The police were looking for me because of the lies they told. I had to disappear. I had to become no one. So I became Ilara, the maid. It was the only way to be safe." The story poured out of her in a quiet, pained whisper. She told him about the constant fear, about looking over her shoulder, about the simple, crushing weight of living a lie every single day. He listened, his face growing more and more serious. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, the room was silent. He was a man who dealt in facts and figures, in mergers and acquisitions. Her story was from a darker, more brutal world. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, his hands in his pockets. He was thinking, his mind working fast. He was not thinking like a man who had just heard a sad story. He was thinking like a tycoon. He turned back to her, his eyes clear and determined. "This changes nothing about who you are to me," he said firmly. "You are still the kindest, strongest person I know." Then a new energy filled his voice. "But it changes everything about your situation. You have been running and hiding. You have been playing defense." He walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. "I am done with playing defense. I have spent my whole life building power. For what? For more money? For a bigger company?" He shook his head. "No, not anymore." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not pity but a fierce, unshakable resolve. "I am going to use my power," he said, his voice low and steady. "My power, my money, my lawyers, my connections. I'm going to use all of it. For you. We are going to find the truth. We are going to clear your name. We are going to make sure these people can never hurt you again." Ilara stood in stunned silence. This was not what she had expected. She expected fear, or maybe at best a sad sympathy. She did not expect this. She did not expect a declaration of war on her behalf. You would do that?" she stammered, barely able to believe it. "It's dangerous. They are powerful." He gave a small, sharp smile, the kind his business rivals probably feared. "So am I," he said. but they use their power to destroy. I will use mine to protect. He didn't move to hug her or hold her hand. This was not a romantic moment. It was something deeper. It was a promise. It was a partnership. For the first time in my life, he said, I have a real reason to use all this. He gestured to the penthouse, the tower, the empire he had built, a reason that actually matters. In that moment, the shocking part of the story was not a secret revealed. It was a future being built. The tycoon was not saving the maid. Together, they were saving each other. He was giving her back her future, and she, without even knowing it, had given his life a purpose. The story that began with a desperate whisper in the dark was now a quiet pact, made in the bright light of day to fight back. And for the first time in a very long time, they were both facing the future without fear, because they would be facing it together.